Welcome to the World of Eora, a news and lore podcast about the Pillars of Eternity games, as well as Obsidian Entertainment's upcoming release, Avowed. Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of the World of Eora. I'm your host Eric, aka Gingerino. Thank you everyone for joining me on another episode as we dive into the history, lore, and game mechanics for Pillars of Eternity as we gear up for the release of Avowed. For those wondering why we pair those games together, it's because they share the same fantasy setting known as Eora, and so as the theory goes, if we dive into Pillars of Eternity game series, we can glean insights into Avowed as it undergoes development, enter into that game with a nuanced understanding of how the world works, and with a deeper appreciation for the writing that goes on. In today's episode, I am going to be doing a mixture of lore topics, so it's not just one topic altogether. What I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be going through the Pillars of Eternity tabletop role-playing game, and I'm going to be talking about lore that we see in there that we don't see either in the games or in other sources. The reason I want to do this is because I don't spend a lot of time utilizing this as a source book because most of the lore is elsewhere, and as well, I'm not 100% sure whether or not to consider this canon or not, and I'll explain why when I start getting into the lore. For those of you not sure what I'm talking about, if you go into eternity.obsidian.net and scroll down a little bit, there is a free version of the Pillars of Eternity tabletop role-playing game. It's a pen and paper tabletop game, just like Dungeons & Dragons, with its own system, meant to be played in the Pillars of Eternity world. Specifically, the Deerwood is where it really kind of gears towards. Now, this is not a complete, finalized, published version of this game. This is still considered in alpha state, or at least that's what it says in the book itself. So there's still some development to be going on for this game. But if any of you are interested in jumping into it, taking a look at it, and giving feedback to Obsidian on that, feel free to check it out. It's completely free to download. It's just on eternity.obsidian.net. And inside this, there are a lot of unique rules on how to run a Pillars of Eternity styled game. As well, there is some lore to glean off of, and so that's what we're going to be looking at today. No news to go over for Pillars of Eternity or Avowed at the moment, so let's just dive straight into the lore we find.
I'm curious, what exactly did you find there?
When you jump into the Pillars of Eternity pen and paper guide, there are a number of things we can learn about the lore. Most of this book, all 126 pages of it, is mechanics and rules and things like that, how to run the actual game. But there is some lore that is covered here, I think, in a way to kind of help establish just a ground or a base level of understanding. You don't have to go far into it. On page 4, it already starts to talk about the regions of the world, such as the old empires like Aedir, Old Valia, and Rauatai, eastern reach areas of the Deerwood, Raed Saris, Valiant Republics, etc., and the distant lands, which includes the White That Wins, Deadfire Archipelago, and the Living Lands, where Avowed is taking place in. There's a quick paragraph about the gods, and even a little section about the Leaden Key, which is a faction from the first Pillars game, which is important for the narrative of that game. But largely, as I said, most of the writing and everything in here goes towards character creation and being able to run the game, understanding how the mechanics of the tabletop version works that Josh Sawyer and maybe other developers, I'm not 100% sure on that, have been making with this game. There is some things that we can learn, however, that is new from this world. For example, and this isn't brand new, but this adds a little bit of nuance and understanding to what the cultures are like within this world. If you go to page 15, there is a section on culture, and outlining the mechanics of how skill sets will work and how picking a culture for a character that you make in this game has impact on the skills you have. We learn the skill sets and the trades that are common in different cultures. So as an example, if you were to develop a character using this model, you would pick a background culture for your character, and you could say that your character is from Aedir. I'm going to go with that because the character in Avowed that we're going to be playing is also from Aedir. Things that we learn about it from here is that there are languages that exist within this nation of Aedir that are considered native and some that are considered local. So the native language is called Eldadiran, and the local languages are Aediran and Hillspeak. This isn't anything new. These are languages we've heard about in the game. But then there's culture skills, and these are the different skills that are practiced in the Aediran culture. We have axes, blacksmithing, bows, carpentry, etiquette, farming, history, housekeeping, hunting, husbandry, insight, laws of Aedir, mace, masonry, milling, negotiating, shields, swords, theology, and woodcutting. The reason that I think this is worth pointing out is because in every culture, there are unique ways of expressing that culture, and depending on where you live, the resources you have, or the history of your culture and your society, certain trades and skills will be emphasized over others. And when we look at these cultural skills of the Aederan nation, we see a lot of these different things, and they have different spheres of influence, they have different categories, and you can kind of learn like what's important from that culture. When you look at another culture, such as Ishadamil, for example, there is a lot of things on oratory, philosophy, insight, things like that, because you learn that the Ishadamil Plains people are very philosophical, they're very thought-based. And Aedir has some of that as well. They have theology in there, and they have negotiating, and they also have insight. But those are all different flavors. When you start to look at the unique list of skills that a culture has, it gives you the flavor of that culture. And I think if you're trying to get into the lore and the flavoring of the fantasy that this world is in, I think looking at these lists is a very good way, especially if you're doing role-playing, to get into the characters and to just understand the world better. So if you're interested in that, go ahead and check it out. I'm not going to list all of the skills in every single culture because that would be, in my opinion, that would be boring and it would be very long-winded. But to give one for the Living Lands, the native language for Living Lands is Aederan. The other languages are Valian and Rawatayan. The reason I'm bringing this up is because Living Lands is a considered frontier land, which means not a lot of people have explored it. But we see here Aedir, Valia, and Rawatai, which are the three old empires. And if we can consider this entire document canon or not is the question, but this seems to indicate that there is an intent by Josh Sawyer, at least one of I would say one of the largest voices in creating this world, that the three old empires are exploring the Living Lands, like they're going to be at the forefront. So what that might have to do with Avowed when we get into that discussion is perhaps we will see the three major empires represented in the Living Lands, and we're going to have to choose like whose values that maybe we align with. There is, of course, also people living in the Living Lands, and here are some skills that they tend to have. Awareness, appraisal, axes, blacksmithing, bluffing, brawl, carouse, carpentry, cobbling, fishing, guns, hunting, light blades, negotiating, spears, survival, tailoring, tattooing, wagoneering, and woodcutting. So a lot of what I would call pioneering-based skills, things that can help you survive both a new and bustling town in the frontier, but also the wild wilderness, right? So those are just some things to consider when looking at the different languages and cultures of certain areas to help you understand a little bit more what it's like to be there. And the languages also give you an idea of what other nations have influenced that. Next little piece of lore that we learn from this is actually in this same area of cultures. When looking at the Valian cultures, there is this one language called Lembur, which is Lembur. Now, from what I recollect playing the Pillars of Eternity games, this never comes up anywhere in the games. Like, maybe it does, and I'm missing it. If that's the case, someone email me, let me know where you saw it, worldofeora@gmail.com. But by my understanding, this language is relatively unheard of in the game. So I don't know if this is just a Josh Sawyer only thing, because again, I don't know if we can consider this canon. I think it's kind of half canon, where it makes sense that it would fit in, since Josh Sawyer had such a deep involvement in the writing of this game. But that being said, this is not published, this is not officially out, so who's to say whether or not this would be considered canon or not. But it seems at one point there was a language called Lembur, and that has to do with Valians. Perhaps it was the older tongue that they had in the Valian nations. Maybe it was their first language or something. I don't know. Moving on to species and stock, which is like races and sub-races, but perhaps in a less politically incorrect terms. Species and stock, starting on page 19, there's not a lot here to look at until you get to the godlike section. Now, if you want to know what a godlike is, I do an episode on that as well. If you play the Pillars of Eternity games, you already know what a godlike is. Essentially, they are touched by the gods. So like when a normal couple is pregnant, the baby is in the womb, one of the gods will bless the baby in the womb, and it'll come out like a godlike. And so its physiology will be akin to that of the god that touched it or blessed it, and it'll also have usually a unique power or aura about it, and it'll have a very distinct physiological appearance. Like a fire god, like literally has fire for hair sometimes. It's very overt. We learn some things about specific godlikes from this. Now, there are several godlikes listed here. We have the avian godlike, which has to do with birds, the dawn godlike, which has to do with the god Aethys. There's the death godlike, endings godlike, fire godlike, marine, moon, and nature godlike, each one with a specific skill that comes with choosing this character, because this is part of the character creation section. If you choose to play as a avian godlike in this tabletop role-playing game, you gain a skill called Featherspeak, and it's described as such. Avian godlike have the innate ability to understand bird songs and communication between birds. Such communication is limited to the senses and intelligence of the bird in question. The avian godlike also have the ability to speak to the birds using their own language, though many concepts are too complex for them to understand. So it seems that avian godlikes have this innate ability to understand birds to a degree. Now, we don't see this, I don't recollect seeing this in-game, because you do get to have an avian godlike companion join you in the first game. But I don't recall seeing a lot of instances of Pallegina talking with birds. But then again, I didn't really like Pallegina, so I didn't pay attention to her very, very much. But I did, still follow her companion quest and all that. So I don't know, maybe I missed something. But apparently, as an avian godlike, you should be able to talk to and understand birds. A dawn godlike is a godlike associated with the god Aethys, god of light and redemption. This is not one that we see in games, so this is only in the tabletop role-playing game that this is really talked about. They have a trait called Dawnbringer. A dawn godlike can cause their body to quickly suffuse with light. The godlike has the ability to control what part or parts of their body generate light and the amount of light. The light does not normally cause any discomfort, to hindrance on onlookers, blah, 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 gamey stuff. Okay, so here's the lore of this, is that essentially, whatever a dawn godlike looks like, we do not know. We don't know what they look like, but they can suffuse their body with light, so they can just make parts or their entire body, if they want, just light up. And so who knows, maybe a dawn godlike looks like a regular person, maybe they always have this ethereal glow about them, but then they can really brighten themselves up at any point in time, who knows. But that's one of these abilities that a dawn godlike has. There's some other lore here that is not unknown, but also not explicitly stated in certain ways. So I'm going to mention it here, but I'm going to breeze through it a little quicker just because I want to move on to stuff that we don't know. The death godlike, which we do see in Pillars of Eternity, associated with the god of death, Bareth, they have an ability called Fade Sense, which essentially lets you have the ability to sense any living entity that is incapacitated, suffering from a debilitating wound, or almost dead. So essentially, as a death godlike, you can tell when a dying creature is nearby. An ending godlike, which is associated with the god Remergond, god of entropy, and just bad luck, I'm pretty sure. They have a skill called Dissolution, which allows them to bring about the inevitable near-term end state of a non-living thing or process. Okay, so here's some examples, just so that you understand what that means. For example, a heavily rusted sword will just reduce completely to flakes. A sputtering fire will be completely extinguished. A cooling drink will be brought to room temperature. So basically, if you think of a thing that is about to reach, I don't know what you call it, equilibrium or entropy or whatever you want to call it, if it's almost at that state, you can just sort of rush it along and get it to finish. The marine and moon godlike both have really powerful abilities. Marine godlikes can literally, once per day, they can move or change the natural flow of up to 200 gallons of water, which is a lot. That's a lot. When you can compare it to something like the nature godlike, and they're like, you can tell what the emotional state of a single beast is within 30 meters. It's like, okay, do you want to move 200 gallons of water, or do you want to know whether this tiger is sad or happy? I mean, I guess if you're about to be attacked by a wild beast, it might be prudent to know what mood they're in to be able to survive better, but still. The moon godlike has something called tidal pull. Basically, they can take a lightweight object and move it around a lot, which is basically telekinesis. It's really cool. But yeah, so there's some lore about the godlikes that we know about. I'm mostly interested in dawn godlike, even though we don't learn a lot because we don't see them in game. Scrolling to page 25, when we learn about different settings for backgrounds of characters, when you're choosing different places that your character grew up in or experienced life in, we learn about a couple universities of Celona and Revua. I don't remember those being mentioned in game. I do know about those names, I'm pretty sure, just from looking at maps, but I don't think we ever talk about the academies set within there. No other associative lore, just that they exist. Getting to page 33 and 34, when we're looking at different skill sets that we can level our characters up in, there is one called Metaphysics, which talks about the practical and theoretical aspects of souls and their function. A lot of what we see in here is known, but it starts to get into areas of speculation for me that I think is very interesting. So at the baser levels, we know the basics of the wheel, which is the cycle of reincarnation in this world. The here, which is the mundane world we live in, the in-between, and the beyond. The in-between is between the here and the beyond. The beyond is where people go to die, or that's where souls go after you die anyways. And so you understand the basic stuff about that. As you increase in your knowledge in metaphysics, you learn things like the different types of Adra, such as living Adra, dead, luminous, and white Adra. White Adra is something we don't talk about very much, so I imagine that GMs in this game will get to determine a lot about what white Adra is and what it can do. But as we increase in our knowledge of metaphysics, there's other things that we learn. For example, you can distinguish between the different types of souls, such as kith or animal. And even though we do learn this in game, it's not necessarily explicitly stated that souls of animals and souls of kith are different types of souls. You know, for example, when you're playing as Sagani, eventually you learn from her that she is seeking the soul of someone who died from her tribe and is probably reincarnated as an animal somewhere. So you get the impression that you can have a kith soul go to an animal afterwards. But can an animal soul move into a kith soul? I don't really know. But at the very least, you can distinguish between types of souls. Why you would want to be able to distinguish it because you could probably just look at the vessel that's holding the soul, I suppose. But this kind of distinguishing trait exists. So you'd be able to tell a plant or a rock what kind of essence is inside of that. We learn a little bit more about animancy, for example, that we can, and this is stuff we kind of know, but it's good to see it written down like this, that you can, if you're well-versed enough in metaphysics and animancy, you can learn to analyze souls to see how many lives have they lived, how long were each of those lives, and was there any relative trauma in any of those lives. The better you get at it, the better you are at extracting memories from them. If you're very good, you can extract specific memories from specific past lives of people. Like that stuff to me is very interesting that can even happen. And it leads to a lot of interesting questions about how do the metaphysics of this world actually work, which of course in a tabletop role-playing like this, they want to leave a lot of that open to interpretation so that you can develop the game the way you want. That's just smart world building by this from the developer standpoint. Next, we move into powers, which starts on page 49. Powers are the resource. This is the gaming mechanics talking. These are the resource that different classes will use to power their abilities. There's no classes in the tabletop role-playing game. You just have access to different power resources. And interestingly enough, you can actually make your own. And I'll talk about what that means in a second. But as an example of a power resource, we have Arcana. Practitioners of Arcana are often called wizards. Arcana allows a wizard to draw fragments of essence from the in-between into a specifically prepared book called a grimoire. The grimoire effectively acts as a capacitator for this energy, which the wizard can unleash in the form of arcane spells. While wizards can use any grimoire as a focus for spells they have mastered, their greater power of grimoires is their ability to allow wizards to cast spells that have been inscribed into the grimoire. And so the lore here, which we're familiar with from the game, is that Arcana is the name of this power, and the power that is being exercised here is that you're able to draw fragments of essence from the in-between and put it into a book. That's basically what's going on. So the in-between is the space between the mundane physical world we're in now and the beyond where souls go after you die. It's the space in between those two areas. And wizards are able to draw essence, which is the stuff that souls are made of as essence. You're able to draw fragments of essence from the in-between and use that essence, craft it into a spell, but then they can hold that into a book and cast it later at their convenience. And that, when you are doing that process, you are engaging in the process of Arcana. You are a practitioner of Arcana. So that's what that power is referencing when it says Arcana. When you talk about the power of bond, this is related to rangers. And so a bond is a spiritual connection between two living, intelligent beings. More than simply emotional, a bond is literally tethering the being's souls together through the in-between. So we talk about this in regard to rangers, how the connection between a ranger and their animal companion is so intimate in their soul that they're practically one person, and that they're very, very linked in a deep metaphysical way. And their souls are literally linked together through the in-between in some way, shape, or form. And so this is an example of different powers that you can have. And the fact that you can invent powers, I think, leaves open to interpretation different ways of working with the metaphysics of this world. So if you understand the world of Eora enough, you could theoretically come up with a way of like, okay, well, how does a person interact with souls, or how does your soul interact with other things in order to generate magical or superhuman abilities? Because that's what a lot of these are doing. It's just looking at different ways that you do this. The Arcana is asking, can people take essence out of the in-between? Bond is asking, can two people connect their souls deeply through the in-between. When we get to discipline, which is what fighters do, they essentially discipline their soul so much that their body and their soul are moving together in unison. Like they have this harmony between body and soul in such a way that they complement each other. And that's just asking a question of like, can you get so good at moving and manipulating your own soul that it works with your body rather than just sort of being with it? Faith asks the question of like your connection to one of the gods, which are just massive deposits of essence, basically. That's one way of putting it. There's focus, which is like the opposite of bond, where you connect to another person and then you kind of like manipulate their soul. So you're using another person's essence to perform abilities. So you connect to them with your soul, obviously, and then you hijack their soul and cause all sorts of havoc with their mind and whatnot using their soul. And that's the practice of the power of focus. And so by reading these, we get a deeper, more flavorful understanding of how different classes use soul powers to do things. Guile, which is what rogues use, they have magical misdirection, where they can kind of like step into the in-between for a little bit. Mortification, which is used by monks, they essentially endure suffering, which channels spiritual power, if you will. So like when you engage in suffering, it somehow gives you a unique power, which you can then channel into the form of magical abilities. Nature is when you're in tune with the soul and the essence of plants and animals and even non-living things like rocks. You're really in tune with that particular kind of essence and you're able to manipulate it. Rage is when you are deeply connected to your soul through your anger. And the one called spirits, which is what chanters use, it's not called that in the game, but it's essentially there's ambient essence just in the air floating all around you, and you're able to kind of stir that essence by chanting ancient poems or something like that that make the memories that are floating in the essence, that's, again, it's all around you, it's ambient, it's in the environment immediately around you. By chanting these ancient poems or whatever, the memories that are floating around in the air kind of collect and stir, and then you can use that essence in the form of a spell, right? So like all of these different power pools are asking the question of how do you as a character interact with essence in different ways. And the fact that you can make your own power, I think it's interesting. So I kind of put a question to those of you out there, especially if you're deep into the lore and theory crafting. What kind of power pool can you think of? Like what kind of unique way of a character interacting with essence can you think of to make a new power pool? Interested to hear what you guys have to say. Send me an email, worldofeora@gmail.com. If you want me to, I'll share it on the show. If you don't want to, but you just want to talk about this stuff, that's fine. Just let me know. Next is on page 97. We have this thing called Maedrs, Maedrs. And this is used when enchanting items with magical abilities. And this is interesting. I think that you can learn this in-game, but I never did because there's always stuff you can miss. A Maedr is essentially either a plant or a fungi that has magical properties to it, and when you either like break it down or distill it or whatever you do with this plant or fungus, and you apply it to a weapon or an armor, or you enchant an item with this stuff, it'll give you certain benefits, right? And so here's the idea behind them, though, is that all of these plants and fungi exist in Eora naturally, but the soul energy that is flowing near living Audra can sometimes cause the plants and fungi to come empowered with magical energy. So in the world of Eora, there's these large deposits of gemstone called Audra, and quite often, especially if it's living Audra, it'll be suffused with soul energy. It'll be suffused with essence. And the plants and the funguses that grow near this Audra will also be infused with essence as well, just by growing near it, and it'll become empowered. Right? So different funguses and different plants will grant different magical effects. For example, Bareth's Bell will be associated with death or poison and the power pool of zeal. It can also be associated with sleep and the power pool of guile, which those are mechanical stuff, but basically Bareth's Bell is a specific type of plant that can grow near Audra, and it usually is associated with death and poison or sleep, right? So depending on the plant or fungus you're using, it will give you unique effects. This next one here, I'm pretty sure you can learn in game, but it's not like written down explicitly anywhere, I think, in the same way, so I'm just going to say it here, is the life phases by species. So if you're playing one of the 5 main races, Amawa, Dwarf, Elf, Folk, or Orlin, the question of like how long does each one live? Well, there's a nice little chart here, and I'm going to read from the old section. Amawas tend to typically live up to mid-90s. The dwarfs typically live up to 150 years. Elves up to 250 years. Folk, which are humans, they live up to 80 years. And the Orlans will roughly live to mid-60s. That's before you hit the old status, right? So that's just a little tidbit there for you, what's considered old. And that does get interesting when you're considering backstories and generations of like one generation of elf, for example, is like 3 generations of human, right? So if you have an old elf talking to an old human, there's like a lot more experience behind the elf than there is the human. That's interesting to consider when you're thinking about the stories and narratives of things in fantasy. And that for me is everything that I could find that I really wanted to bring forth on this recording. I skimmed through it. I did read through the entire thing, and there were some other little bits here and there, but I didn't think that they were either particularly notable or connected to anything meaningful, or I even understood. So if anyone's read through that and you found something else that maybe I missed, again, send me an email, worldofeora@gmail.com. I love to hear what you guys have to say about this stuff. But that being said, that's all the lore we have for today. If you're interested in the Pillars of Eternity tabletop role-playing game, especially providing feedback for it, again, go on to eternity.obsidian.net, download this pen and paper copy, play a game with some D&D friends of yours. The mechanics, I don't know if they're fully fleshed out yet, and there's some that, for me, was very confusing. Like, I wasn't sure how to build characters, for example. But if you can figure out the rules and play a game or so, then I think Obsidian would like that feedback. I know Josh Sawyer, he updates on Twitter every now and then with things that he's doing. What does this have to do with the game of Avowed?
Is an oath worth the weight of a crown?
Now, as I mentioned, there's a lot of different types of lore in today's episode, so I'm not going to go through each thing I brought up and say how it might have to do with Avowed. A lot of it, I think, is common sense. Like the Valian language of Limber. Will it be in Avowed? Maybe. Who knows? Probably not, because it wasn't very emphatic in Pillars 1 or 2, and I don't see why they would need to take a big step to look at that language in Avowed, but who knows? Maybe it'll play a part. Maybe there'll be one character who speaks this language, and it'll be good for you to know this old language. But the thing that stands out for me is the culture skills of different areas, especially Adir and the Living Lands, because I think if you look at that list and you really stop and think about what would a society or a nation that values these particular skills and trades, what kind of society is that? And I think that's important because Obsidian are known for their depth of writing, and so I think that those flavors are still going to be in the writing for Avowed. And understanding those backstories and those nations, I think will just give you a deeper understanding and appreciation. As for things like powers, I think I am modeling, and this is my own guess, this is my own opinion, that the way they're going to handle leveling up in Avowed is leveling up different power pools. So like how I brought up Arcana, Bond, Nature, Rage, Focus, all these different power pools that people can basically use Essence with. I feel like that is the way that Avowed is going to handle leveling up. That you're going to have these different, I guess you could call it power trees, and depending on what points you put leveling up experience into will determine what abilities you have, and those abilities associate with that particular power pool. That's kind of how I picture it. But other than that, I don't know what else to say for its connection to Avowed that you guys wouldn't already be able to think about. But if you thought of anything in listening to this episode, send me an email, worldofeora@gmail.com. And while you're sending me an email, maybe jump on Twitter, follow the show @worldofeora. I usually just give updates on when shows are out or if there's any news that really needs to be attended to. I haven't been playing much new lately. I haven't actually played a lot of Baldur's Gate 3. I think I'm kind of getting fatigued on it, but I do want to finish it, so I'm going to. But my brother-in-law and a friend and my other brother recently wanted to start playing games again. Like, we used to play games as a crew all the time, and we decided, okay, we want to get into playing games again. What are we going to play? And we all have decision paralysis where we're bad at making decisions. So the one guy who's great at making it, he's like, how about this? And he threw Ghostbusters Spirits Unleashed into the mix, which is an asymmetrical game. It's 4v1. One person plays a ghost haunting a building. The other players play as Ghostbusters trying to bust the ghost. And it's kind of like Dead by Daylight mixed with Prop Hunt, where, you're as the ghost, you're trying to haunt this building to 100%, but the Ghostbusters are trying to stop you and capture you. It is actually a really fun game. I think playing it for like longer than an hour and a half gets a little bit samey after a while, so it's good to play it in just like 1 to 1.5 hours just for fun times. Playing as the ghost, in my opinion, is really intense because you're just constantly trying to escape from 4 human NPCs, not NPCs, 4 player-controlled characters, and hunt this building at the same time. And it's just like, it's constantly like being chased for 10 to 12 minutes. It's very intense. I don't know if I like it, but it is fun. It is fun. I'll give it that. So that's what I've been playing this last week, if you can believe it, is that. Starfield just came out. I haven't had a chance to play it yet, but I'm looking forward to jumping into it. There's a lot of mixed opinions, but whatever. I'm going to enjoy it. I'm going to try it. But if any of you have jumped into Starfield yet and you want to share your character builds or your thoughts in the game, I know that there was a lot of expectations walking into a Bethesda game that are not being met, and I think that if we take Starfield as it was meant to be, not as we think it's meant to be based on what Bethesda has done in previous games, then maybe it'll color it differently. I don't know. If any of you played Starfield and you want to maybe get the word out there to other people on what to expect or ways to play the game well, feel free to include that in an email to me. I can read it in the show if you're interested, worldofeora@gmail.com. I only have so many listeners, but hey, you know what? Get the word out. Who cares, right? So that's everything I want to cover. Thanks, everyone, for listening to today's episode on lore from the Pillars of Eternity pen and paper tabletop role-playing game as being developed by Josh Sawyer on Obsidian's website. I've been your host, Eric, a.k.a. Gingerino, and I'll see you guys next time. Actually, one more thing before I go. I just thought of this while I was editing this episode. There is a YouTube channel I want to recommend out there to people. I think I brought it up before, but I just want to bring it up again. So there's a YouTube channel, SENTEGRAPHS, that exists, and the guy that is in charge of that is doing what he calls a Lorethrough of Pillars of Eternity 1. A Lorethrough, the idea that I get from it is essentially it's a let's play, it's a playthrough of a game, but it's really focusing on going slowly, looking at the lore, thinking through big questions, and really taking the time to soak in the world and check it all out. I have been listening to his YouTube videos at work, so I obviously have been eating up lots of data, but whatever, data be damned, it's been really great. Like, I know the lore of this world, but it's so good to just listen to this guy's playthrough and read through everything and check out the world, and he asks a lot of great questions. And I'm wanting to recommend it for those of you out there who are interested in the world of Eora. You're interested in what the games are like, but you don't want to really replay the games, or you're not interested in playing Pillars of Eternity. I really recommend checking his stuff out if you want a thoroughgoing Let's Play. I know I did a Let's Play of Pillars of Eternity, but I followed the critical path. I went really quick. It was more about character play, and it was just me goofing around. This guy really slows down. I think he's at 30-something episodes right now, and he's in Defiance Bay, and it's great. Honestly, I listen to a full episode every day at work, just soaking it in. So if that's the kind of thing you're looking for, if that's the kind of thing you're interested in, I highly recommend it. His name is SENTEGRAPHS, SENTEGRAPHS. It's like a mixture of sentence and paragraphs. It's kind of like how I remember it. Yeah, check that out. Anyways, that's it. Thanks everyone for listening. I'll see you guys next time.